Hello and welcome to the AIM North America AIT Alliance webinar discussion on why the AIT Alliance makes business sense. I am Mike Ellen, the Member Engagement Manager for AIM. Today I'll be joined by Greg Reddick, Stan Skokie, and Bob Fudge. In a moment I will let them speak a little more about their respective backgrounds, but first I'd like to tell you about AIM North America. AIM North America is a trusted worldwide industry association for the automatic identification industry. For more than 15 years, AIM North America has provided unbiased information, educational resources, and standards to providers and users of these technologies. AIM North America membership provides access to an insider's perspective on trends and opportunities, along with a voice in shaping the growth and future of the industry. AIM North America member benefits include education, advocacy, and community, as well as a role in creating industry standards through collaboration. AIM North America is an investment in your future. The AIT Alliance is an AIM North America committee. The group of automatic identification technology suppliers and manufacturers is dedicated to raising awareness about AIT and encouraging the adoption of AIT policies within U.S. government agencies and the U.S. government contractor community. To begin, I would like our speakers to introduce themselves. So, Greg, I'd like to start with you.
Yes, sir. I'm a long-time founding member of this AIT Suppliers Alliance, and the reason is largely because I was primarily responsible for the development of the Item Unique Identification Policy issued in 2003 by the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. I'll talk about that a little bit more directly, but a career military officer, and no matter how hard I try, it appears I can't seem to get away from the subject, and see no reason to do that. So I'm here to try and help make things better.
Great, thank you. Stan, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah, hi, my name is Stan Skokie, and I'm the CEO of a firm called the Capital Initiatives Group, and we've been representing the AIT Alliance now for many, many years here on Capitol here in Washington, D.C. Prior to starting my firm, which I did about 2 years ago, I worked with another firm that also did work with the AIT Alliance, and then prior to that, used to work on Capitol Hill. I worked both in the House and Senate, worked for the Appropriations Committee, and worked in House leadership. So I've been here in Washington for almost 25 years now.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Bob Fudge?
Hello, this is Bob Fudge, Vice President for Evanhoe & Associates. Evanhoe is also a founding member of what used to be called the IUID Suppliers Alliance, now the AIT Alliance. We are a small business based in Dayton, Ohio, that focuses on both government and commercial IT work, more specifically around automatic identification technologies like RFID and barcode applications. Like Greg, I'm a retired military officer and just can't seem to get away from trying to do what's right for the Air Force.
You just can't get away, can you?
Right.
All right, thank you guys so much. I appreciate that. Now that we've heard from our speakers, I would like to take a moment and hear from the rest of the attendees on this webinar. If you could please state your name, organization, and what you hope to get from the discussion. And I'm just going to start with Jeannie Duckett here from Avery Dennison.
Terrible mute button.
That's okay. We'll move.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
And that was such a beautiful introduction, too.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay. Anyway, I'm Jeannie Duckett. I work here in printer development for Avery Dennison. And what I hope to get today is some information about how the standards and the government works with promoting standards in government applications.
Okay. Thank you, Jeannie. We also have Mary on the line. I think this is Mary Sheridan from OmniID.
Hi, yes, this is Mary. I'm in marketing with OmniID, and we do supply RFID tags in government and through the Marine Corps, and I'm just looking at getting a better understanding of standards and what all these lists are, the NFPA.
Okay, thank you, Mary. I'm sorry, you did cut out a little bit on me, but if you're having any phone issues, you can always use our chat icon. It's at the top right corner of your screen, and if you have any questions or anything, you can just type it into there, and I can ask the members on those questions. We also have Tim Collins on the call as well. He's from A2B Tracking Solutions.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. Well, I'm just listening in. Obviously, a lot of you know my brother Peter very well, and so I'm getting up to speed on some of the things he hears firsthand.
Okay, great. Thank you. Also on the call is Lonnie Spencer. And Lonnie's from Tomco Incorporated. I know he's on mute now. He's been chatting with me in the chat room, so I know if he has any questions or anything, he will get those to me. So if we just want to move forward, Greg, would you like to get started?
Sure. So part of the reason for the introductions of those that are listening in is to get a better sense of who you are, and as we go along, both Stan, Bob, and I, or all three of us, are more than happy to answer your questions and make sure that the time spent on this webinar is of value to you. Collectively, we have as much experience in this area as anybody that you might talk to, save maybe Peter Collins' father or Tim Collins' father. If you would, Mike, go to my first chart, the AIDC AIT-related initiatives, and I'll get started there.
Yeah.
So the real reason for this next few slides is to set the stage on why this committee exists and how it is a little different than just a focus on the technologies of barcoding and RFID. You know, those technologies are always very interesting and cool. You know, you can go to an RFID conference, RFID Journal puts those on all the time. But invariably, the use of those technologies, be they barcodes in any form that they have, RFID, be it active, be it passive, be it the use of contact memory buttons or any other form of automatic identification and data collection or automatic identification technologies, is driven by some kind of policy. I heard the word standards earlier as well. And those policies and those standards have to be put in place at some point. And we have sought through this, through AIM and this subcommittee, to try and influence those policies and the adoption and implementation of them. So this first slide starts out with BLUF, and that's an Army acronym I learned many years ago in Afghanistan. Bottom line up front. The bottom line is there are lots of initiatives across the federal government, and you see logos there, and even one from India, where some form of AIT is involved in a policy for tracking and tracing, unique identification, asset management, some issue of data collection. So recognizing that and knowing that technology isn't an answer by itself, it's really often about policy, procedures, and process. It's important, I think, to understand that there's an imperative to think broadly about how customers can support those initiatives and help the users understand how the software can be made to help reach their goals, how the services and the hardware all interact, and engage as AIM members to help bring about a better use of taxpayer dollars. So with that, I'll go to the next page, Mike.
Okay.
And I would tell you, it's not my intent to go through each of the next following slides in great detail, but rather to talk about them on a high level and just point out that if you think that data collection is isolated to one little area, it's not. There are lots of data collection policies. So the DoD's Item Unique Identification Policy, I gave that policy to Secretary Mike Wynn in June of 2003. It's been revised repeatedly over the years, most recently in September of 2015. It is addressed as a policy in 2 DoD directives, 11 instructions, 6 publications, 2 military standards, various memorandum, and the supplement to the Federal Acquisition Regulation. It is a data collection policy. It is not a policy on the use of a 2D barcode. It happens to require the use of the 2D barcode, but it is a policy about data collection. The benefits and who it applies to are there for you to read, but largely it was put in place for the DoD to better get its grip on its management of assets across the entire department and ultimately comply with the Chief Financial Officers Act that required reporting back on the value of all the assets held by the agency. It's been slow in coming. That policy was released in 2003. This is 2016, near 2017, and then adoption and implementation has been lackluster at best. I think all of my peers there would agree. What we have sought to do is push that adoption and implementation up on Capitol Hill, twist DoD's arm, and as a result, it is a better effort for all members of AIM because that rising tide floats all boats. So if you go to the next one, this is the next slide, the EPA's manifest system. This is another example in another federal agency of a data collection initiative to track hazardous waste shipment. You know, the hazardous waste we don't want ending up in places it's not supposed to be. And so the EPA created the e-manifest system to track movement from the site that waste was generated to a treatment, storage, and or disposal location. The AIT requirement issued in 2013 with a request for information didn't specifically call out a form of AIT, barcodes or RFID tags, but if you read what they were looking for in that request for information, it's very plain that it could be envisioned as being a better process with it for the sheer benefit of what AIDC or AIT technology provides. That you don't have fat fingers keying in information into a keyboard or somebody writing something down that somebody else can't read later. And so the EPA's e-manifest system is another one of those policy initiatives. It's not a technology initiative, policy initiative that could, in fact, be much better with the use of AIT. Mike, if you go to the next slide, the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, NICS, is used by federal firearms licensees to determine the eligibility of those that are wanting to buy firearms and or solicits. It is a data collection policy and uses, in this case, a unique number, much like DoD's unique identification policy that's assigned to each inquiry. The data collection there, when you have 100 million plus checks made in the past decade, can only be improved and leveraged using AIT, AIDC. Again, it's not a technology issue so much as it is a policy issue. Next slide. The DLA's DNA authentication of electronic microcircuit. So the DLA, the Defense Logistics Agency, wanted some time ago to guarantee that electronic components would not be made counterfeited, or be counterfeited, excuse me. And they issued a policy that said that only this particular method for authentication of those electronic circuits was going to be used. The DNA authentication was issued in August of 2012, and from a policy that might make sense at first glance, but for those of us that have been involved in it, in the business here for a while, it didn't make sense because it categorically excluded barcode, it categorically excluded RFID tags, and seemed an inappropriate use of the acquisition procedures in the FAR and the DFAR supplement, where the possibility might have existed that other technologies could have similarly brought about the same result being sought. From a committee standpoint, you know, this is an opportunity for us to say, hey, DLA, you're not being informed wisely in the issuance of your policy, and there's a whole slew of different ways that the results you're looking for can be realized. That goes to the middle bullet there, why sole source. They claim to have done extensive research and development using and testing the technology, yet if you look at that research, they did not think about how existing policy already in place, like IUID, and the use of other technologies could have been used to bring about the same result that they were looking for. It, in my mind, quite honestly, was a boondoggle for applied DNA sciences, and they were very benefited greatly from the issuance of that policy. And then the next slide is FDA's unique device identification. Much like DoD, the FDA wanted to require the designation of a unique identifier on certain medical items. You see the list there under applies to, in order to better track those things. The DoD policy already existed. We had already figured out how to put the onus of responsibility on the manufacturers without prescribing to them how they would mark their items. We can get into the technical aspects of how somebody might serialize within a part number, how they issued their serial numbers, but the DoD didn't think that that made a lot of sense to tell industry how to do its business. Instead, the item unique identification policy set forth the standard that was to be expected in the performance and the marking of their items that came to the DoD inventory. FDA took a different approach. Despite a number of people in the department talking to the folks in FDA, they decided they were going to do something very different. And that is reflected in that policy. Two things to take away here is, one, there is a data collection policy in place. Two, it isn't necessarily in concert with existing data collection policies elsewhere in the federal government. And AIM, as a trade association, can have an impact on how that works. And then lastly, I'll get to the conclusion slide. Data collection keeps evolving, and the ability to influence that evolution and its adoption and its implementation, I think, is really the big reason why this committee exists and has existed for as long as it has. And the example that I've used on that slide is the development of emerging VR codes from MIT, where an image is scanned, as you see there in that picture, and all of a sudden it takes you to a newsflash app or a web page or wherever that provides you more data.
Greg, you're still on the old slide.
Oh, I should be on the conclusion slide. So, you know, you don't even see a barcode on that Boston Globe front page there, yet the scan by the smartphone reveals a hidden image that takes you to the data that you want, or the data that's there. So the imperative, again, is to think broadly about supporting customers with hardware, software, and services, and engaging as AIM members to help bring about the better use and implementation of these technologies in the federal government that is then, you know, better for taxpayers and better for the member companies within AIM. So that was kind of my introduction for Stan and Bob then.
Right.
Okay, thank you, Greg, for that. Now, we did have a question. I know there's a question and answer session at the very end, but maybe we could just tackle this one right now.
Sure.
The question is, why was the healthcare initiative more successful?
Why was that? That's a really good question. I would tell you that there's probably a couple of answers to that. The onus of responsibility initially for item unique identification was for legacy items, and then, new items. And the only way new items get marked is when that requirement is included in a contract. So a contractor is not going to do anything unless the contract they have says do X. They're not going to do X if that's not in their contract. And so we found early on that program offices and those offices where contracts were being let weren't including the IUID requirement, and as a result, contractors delivering parts and equipment and items to the government, to DOD, weren't marking it. How do you get them to do that? That's how. The implementation was resisted for reasons that we can go on and on and on talking about. But I think the big reason was the lack of inclusion as a contract requirement for those goods and items that were being delivered to the government. Bob, you might want to add, but I think if I was to pick one, that was probably the biggest reason.
All right, and Stan, would you like to continue on?
Sure. Happy to take on. Thank you, Greg. Mike, how much in terms of time? How are we doing?
It is 11:30, so
okay.
I would say we have about 20 minutes, and then we want to do, you know, a Q&A session as well.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha. So I'm going to move kind of fast through some of the slides here, Mike. So,
Okay.
but first of all, I want to thank everyone for giving us the opportunity here to talk to you today, and thank you for your interest. My portion of the discussion will focus on really enhancing business through government engagement and advocacy. And so if you go to that next slide, typically when we talk about this, there's a lot of questions that I get typically about engagement. You know, what is government engagement? Number two, really, what are the benefits of government engagement? Both from a committee perspective, like an AIT Alliance perspective, but also from an individual member perspective. We get that constantly through there, and there are benefits to both, to being engaged, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And of course, the third bullet we're going to talk about is a little bit about how the AIT Alliance needs your assistance, and also try to map out a couple of ways that you can be involved in kind of an easy and a time-effective way, because we know you also have day-to-day jobs that you're responsible for, so we try to make this as very user-friendly as possible. So typically when we get into the next slide, if you could, Mike, before I can even talk about those 3 points, as usually I get a question periodically about, well, who can do government engagement? And basically the answer to that is everybody. And so you got advocacy groups that are out there that can be involved. You have trade associations that are involved, just like we are, AIM North America. Individual businesses can be engaged in engagement. You have think tanks and, of course, individuals. So bottom line is, everybody on this call, you can be engaged, and some of you, frankly, are already engaged. So we'd like to make sure that you can continue to do that. Next slide, please, if you could. Government engagement, basically, is when I think about it, is really 3 fundamental areas. One is education, and number 2 is policy development, and the third arm of that really is advocacy. And let me go through the next slide. Let's talk a little bit about education. Education, I tell you, I feel like majority of our time, and Greg and Bob, you guys could probably echo this, a lot of our members spend a significant amount of time educating our members about whether it be IUID, AIT, and some of the technology issues, as well as some of the policy things that are happening with regard to, say, the administrative branch of government, the Department of Defense. And so some folks in Congress don't necessarily are up to speed on all that stuff, so we spend a lot of time educating. We typically will target our audience to the federal government, so we do work closely with the legislative branch, members of Congress in particular, committees, staff. We also work with the executive branch, everything from the assistant secretaries to contract officers. And we also do a number of creative ways to educate members. And they could be forums, trade shows, workshops, technology demonstrations, and of course we do a lot of visits both on Capitol Hill as well as having members of Congress and staff visit individual company members. In fact, that photo at the bottom of the slide there is actually one of our forums we did last year with the Department of Defense focusing on IUID. And next slide, Mike. So in addition to education, then we come up with policy development. So we actually sit down as a group and we spend a significant amount of time proposing, outlining what the challenges are, the problem, but then proposing policy solutions and initiatives to help fix those challenges or their shortcomings. And in our case with IUID, it's implementation. There's been some hiccups with implementation that have had a significant impact on the adoption of the policy throughout the various quarters of the Department of Defense, as well as with the contract community. We spend a lot of time of consulting with individual parties about the solutions, and so everyone really has a say in developing those particular policy initiatives. And of course, we develop policy papers and we write legislation. We've written bills that have actually been enacted by Congress. I'll go through that a little bit later. Report language, you name it. So significant amount of time of our AIT Alliance, we focused on that policy side. Next slide, please. And of course, the advocacy part is we take that product, basically that policy and some of those initiatives, and we go through and actually work closely with our key decision makers. In that, we the education is nonstop. We expand our network of supporters, and so that's something we spend a significant amount of time is building relationships, both with the executive branch as well as on Capitol Hill with staff and with members of Congress. And of course, tracking legislation and policy. So in addition to being very proactive, we also then monitor our initiatives that we're putting forward, as well as tracking other initiatives that may be going on that we might be able to piggyback, or things that we may have to fight and battle. And of course, ensuring compliance. It's also, I always put that bullet on there because a lot of folks will think that once a bill is passed or enacted, that the game is over. In fact, in many respects, things are just getting started at that point. And IUID would be a great case study because, as Greg mentioned, the policy's been in place for going on over 13 years now. So we're still trying to get compliance and certainly adoption of that policy throughout the different quarters of Department of Defense. Next slide, please. Well, while that slide's still on there, I'd be remiss to mention that that's Bob Fudge, by the way, meeting with Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. And, of course, we gave our AIT Alliance Award to Senator Portman of Ohio. Previous year, we gave it to Senator Whitehouse of Rhode Island. And, of course, this year we gave it to Congressman Larson of Washington State. And, of course, very bipartisan, so Democrat, Republicans, we work across the aisle. Let me talk just briefly about the AIT Alliance objectives. This year and in previous years, we really spent a very focused effort to really educate members of Congress and the administration about AIT and AIDC, IUID, and now we've actually added IoT, Internet of Things. We're really trying to focus on really the adoption of IUID, as I mentioned, as well as other AIT and AIDC type of initiatives and policies and technologies. We also work pretty closely to promote legislation and various policy initiatives, and I'm going to walk through that a little bit here. And, of course, we work with various congressional caucuses as well as the Department of Commerce on IoT and some other things. In fact, this year we've seen that grow pretty significantly. In fact, we did a pretty exciting briefing with the IoT caucus in the House where basically the panel was all our members, which was pretty exciting and gave each one of those member companies an opportunity to really talk not only about IoT, but specifically about their experience in that sphere with members of Congress and their staff. Next slide, please. Yeah, Mike, you want to switch the slide there? Well, Mike is hitting the slide change button here. We on education stuff. One of the strengths of our alliance and what we could even grow even further with your participation is our reach within Congress, and so we have a lot of folks with different geographical connections, which has been just fantastic. So everywhere from Washington to Ohio, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island. And so those particular delegations have very prominent leadership positions within the Armed Services Committee and the Appropriations Committees in the Congress, which have been very, very, very important to us in our policy initiatives and really a key to our success in getting a lot of our legislation adopted. And also from a member perspective, I think this is really important. I think, Bob, you're going to talk about this a little bit more detail, but it allows the individual companies to build that strong relationship with the members, and as well from a marketing perspective and other things from just a purely company-oriented perspective. It allows you to really take some opportunities to grow your business and expand your networks pretty significantly. We've held symposia on Capitol Hill as well as with the Department of Defense, which have, again, been great media opportunities, not only for the AIT Alliance, but all our member participants. So we have a lot of our companies have been very active in social media and various other activities to get their message out. We as an alliance have been doing more of that, frankly. We've been getting, we have Twitter feeds and different things to really get that opportunity out there. And from a branding perspective, it's been really helpful to a lot of our folks. we work with a lot of the thought leaders on Capitol Hill, and that includes not only decision makers, but then we have the GAO. We also work with our folks in the Congressional Budget Office and some other folks, and there's been a lot of reports and detailed information coming out that can also be used by a lot of our members to really help expand business opportunities.
And which slide would you like me to be on?
20. Oh, I think it's 20. It should be AIT Alliance Policy Development.
Okay.
Yep, you're on. You're good. Yep. So this year, in the last several years, we've actually developed, I talked about the legislation. We've actually written legislation, and that was included in both the Defense Authorization Bill, that's an annual measure that oversees the defense spending, which has been pretty significant. And we've also had language included in the defense appropriation bills that have really directed the Department of Defense to do various things, which have been really, really helpful. You can go to the next slide, which should be, we're going to talk a little bit about specific ways that you can help the Alliance. Well, one of the things, obviously, trying to influence government is a massive endeavor. That's an understatement. It's, we have a lot of members of Congress, 535 members, various committees. We focus primarily on the defense area, but now working with IoT, it crosses all different committees in Congress. And Greg alluded to some of the other areas that we're starting to look at, whether it be the Department of Justice or whether it be the FDA or with the health committees. It's pretty significant there. The AIT Alliance was really exciting because we have significant reach into those committees, which has been great. So again, getting your participation expands that reach even greater. So it's as a collective body that really can make a huge impact in terms of getting our message out as well as getting our brand out and getting folks more aware about not only the technologies but the various policies we're trying to advocate on. And the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the benefits of the advocacy. I think really first and foremost, our members, and Greg and Bob will probably echo this, and maybe some of our other members that are on the call, is really our civic duty. A lot of our folks are part of this group or founded this group because they did it because they think this is really the right thing to do. Congress and government, it's a real benefit for the adoption of the item of unique identification policy. It not only saves lives in the field, but we're saving a significant amount of taxpayer dollars and really promoting greater efficiencies across the defense that is really a benefit to everybody. So that's first and foremost why we're involved. I think all the companies, when you sit there and you look at why you want to be engaged, you look at not only the good of the industry, but you also look at, how is my company going to benefit from this? And in addition to doing your civic duty, it's also raising the profile of the company. And you'll see in this picture there, that was our IoT forum. That was a small forum that we did. That was, again, all these opportunities to get your company name, your brand, your individual expertise out there in the field is huge. Of course, from a company and from an industry-wide, we're always looking at broadening that customer base and how do you expand your government business. And this is one way to really do that. And again, we don't only work with Congress, we work with the executive branch, but Congress works very closely in terms of funding those initiatives. So without the money, you're not going to have a lot of the contract vehicles. So we really try to work on both the policy side and as well as the money side to really make sure that there's a pot that you all can go out and compete and hopefully win different contracts.
Stan, could I add something really quickly?
Yes, please.
So I'm Michael. I work with Stan. And I just wanted to share something that a congressional staffer shared with us when we met with them last or earlier this year. With regard to the AIT Alliance, he described it as the one group that has real success every year. And that was kind of amazing because, of course, they see hundreds, if not thousands, of groups. And it's basically because most of what we advocate for is basically good governance, bipartisan measures that lots of people agree with. But it just testifies to how members of Congress see us.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's really because of the members. I mean, the members of the AIT Alliance that are coming up and advocating and developing these relationships, but putting forward great policies that kind of piggyback on that education effort, raising the awareness of a challenge or a shortcoming in a policy as well as a benefit of a technology. And you're right, every year we get consistency going back and, you know, presenting that type of information, the data, the info has just been superb. And the staff, you're right, across the aisle, whether it be committee staff or other staff or the members themselves have just really valued that. And as a result, been able to get things done, which has been good. So our next slide, Michael, should be number 24 here. So one of the things I talked a little bit about that collaboration. So as a group, we get together and we have at least calls once a month. We also have small working groups that allow each of us to share this collaboration with regard to subject matter expertise, a lot of technical knowledge is shared in terms of gaining information. So all of us are sharing it, but also some of us are receiving it. We're developing policy proposals. And those discussions have just been, I think, been very, very helpful. And I think for all our members involved, it just presents a great opportunity for that growth. And again, that network opportunity, it leads right to that marketing, networking, and those opportunities within the industry, but also within government agencies. When you're sharing that expertise with a Department of Defense person or someone with the Army, the Air Force, or Marine Corps, so on and so forth, it's been really helpful, and it's that creates those opportunities. And again, segues right to those business opportunities. It just creates a more favorable atmosphere for the industry. And again, at the bottom line, it's looking for those business opportunities. How can you continue to grow what you have or look for those new opportunities? And so I think all of this is just it's a benefit, again, for the industry. And again, going back to that civic duty issue, it really goes back to doing the right thing for our service, for our warfighters that are out there. And Greg and Bob, you both wore the uniform. You know firsthand the value of that. But again, for us as an alliance, I think it really presents that unique opportunity. And again, one of the things we try to do, as I alluded to, is try to make this simple as possible. And so a lot of times what we do is if you can come out to DC, great. If you cannot, if you're able to send an email that we prepare for you, that you might be able to just tweak here and there and personalize, we make that as user-friendly as possible. We also try to get the members and the staff to go see you where you live and where you operate. And so we've had a number of members that have company members, I'm talking about AIT member alliance members, have said, listen, I may not be able to get to Washington, but man, I can bring folks here. And so we've had some great demonstrations of technologies within their particular offices. We've had showcases of like field trips out to various military bases or installations or government or corporate facilities where you're doing your work that you could showcase it. And we've had members of Congress do that, as well as staffs and committee folks. So however you want to be involved, we can tailor it to you to get your full engagement. And Michael, I think that's it for us. So if there's any questions, happy to answer them now, or maybe at the end of the overall presentation.
All right, thank you, Stan. Appreciate it. And next, we'll be having Bob Fudge speak.
Hi, this is Bob Fudge.
I apologize, Bob. I'm going to go through Gary Moe's slides real quick. Just he wasn't able to make today's meeting, so.
Yeah. So you saw some of Gary's slides. He's out in Washington State. And he would have said many of the same things that I will say from a company perspective of why do we participate in the AIT Alliance and as members of AIM. It really gives us an opportunity if you're in the business of selling to the government in IT and IT products and services. This is a great way to hopefully, and I think we've had some success in influencing policy decisions and even funding decisions to make investments in automatic identification technologies. So Stan hit pretty well on the education and advocacy. I'm the current chair of the AIT Alliance, and do it because it's a good government initiative. We hope to make some money with it. Obviously, that's why we're in business, is to make money. But if we can also do good things for the government, that's also a nice thing to come away with. It's a long-term investment. I'll caveat it with saying that if you're coming in for 1 year to be a member of the AIT Alliance because you think it's going to turn into an immediate cash cow, that's probably not a realistic expectation. Because we are educating both Department of Defense and federal agency members on the goodness of AIT, and the congressional folks on the goodness of AIT, and moving policy which drives execution and funding, it's not a quick process. If you've ever done work for the government, it's not a quick process. But in the long term, I think we as an alliance and as members of the alliance, as the experts in this area, stand to make money at some point when the policy is better adopted. So we've been very successful in working with Stan and his group. We've been very successful in actually getting things into the National Defense Authorization Act of 14, and pretty soon in the FY17 NDAA. You changed slides on me, Mike, but that's okay. We're good. One of the things that's led to from us is that we are working very closely with our congressmen and senators, both in Ohio, and since we have offices in Georgia and Alabama, it gives us a way to get into those offices, and they're interested in talking to us, one, because we have employees in the state, and two, because we're presenting bipartisan ideas that result in good government decisions.
Okay, well, I appreciate everyone for joining us today. I hope it was a very informative webinar that we had here. Once again, our contact information is up on the screen. Please contact us if you have any questions or would like to join the AIT Alliance. I hope you have a great rest of the day, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.